Since the 1970s, the film industry has been contending with the chin. Now, Gareth Miles and Simon Appleton examine each year in the career of Bruce Campbell.
Hello and welcome to A Year in the Career. I'm your host Gareth, and this week, as always, I'm joined by Simon. How are you, Simon?
I'm good. How are you?
I can't complain. Looking forward to talking about this week's topics, because last week was terrific. This is the podcast where we talk about the career of Bruce Campbell 1 year at a time. Last week we got through 1990 with Maniac Cop 2 and Sundown the Vampire in Retreat, and we're going to be looking at a couple of films that came out in 1991. One could be argued, the other is very much a 1991 film. So what's happening with you, Simon? Anything new and exciting?
No, same old, same old. Just keeping an eye on the movie industry and what it's not really doing at the moment.
Okay, all right. And as always, people can get in touch with Simon over on Movie Mustache. And what's your Twitter?
At movie_mustache.
Groovy, and all your analogies of how to survive lockdown watching.
We're finding a few things for you.
Yeah, that's all cool. And of course, you can get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter at Gareth Miles, and my GarethMiles.com is back up and running. So, this week, Lunatics, A Love Story, was released in 1991.
I thought that maybe you and I had a future together.
Yeah, well, you thought that because you're nuts. Come on, look at us. We don't have anything in common. After listening to you spout poetry for 5 days in the car, you're lucky I didn't dump you in Death Valley.
This was a little film that Bruce has a fairly small role, and he produced as well. It was directed by longtime cohort Josh Becker, who was from the Evil Dead days, and he's made a number of interesting movies around this time. It has a pretty interesting cast of, well, I'd say actually familiar faces. You've got Deborah Foreman, who was in last week's Sundown. You've got Bruce playing a couple of roles that we'll get into, and it's led by Ted Raimi, who is Sam's brother and quite a competent actor in every way possible, and really does tend to get cast in very peculiar movies. I think it was around this time that he made Skinner, which is I think after this he made Skinner, come to think of it, which has just received a nice Blu-ray that I picked up recently and I watched and I quite enjoyed it. He was also making Patriot Games and Candyman around this time as well. So the world was his oyster and he seemed to be making bigger and better movies. So Lunatics is obviously a strategy move for him to get him to show off his acting prowess, and he's got a unique look, does Ted Raimi, and he plays that kind of nerdy hero who has to overcome everything in order to succeed. He's pretty good in this film. But Simon, this was your first experience of Lunatics, A Love Story, and I'm interested to see what you made of this little independent horror comedy.
So it's one of those films where there's things that I liked about it and those things that I didn't. Overall, I wasn't a massive fan of it, but it's very odd. But Ted Raimi, I thought, was good. I thought his performance, I thought he carried the film very well, because obviously the focus is very much on him as much as it is about the two. It seems to be more of the focus, and I think he carries it very well. The feeling of loneliness and isolation felt very genuine with him. I actually believed that he was a man stuck in his own apartment, who afraid to leave, tortured by mental health issues and constantly worrying about everything.
Yes.
Don't think he can pull off the shiny tinfoil look, though. I think that's a bit much for him.
Yes, he wasn't exactly a new superhero there.
No, but as I said, I thought he did it very well. As usual, Bruce, as the brain surgeon, and as I'm trying to think who else he was. He was the Russian leader on the magazine, and there was and there's again playing a dick, and but still perfectly lovable. He's brilliant as the dick. He's actually really funny.
Yes.
In that role.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd film where you know that he's producing, and it's almost like there wasn't another role for him to play that was large enough to encompass him, so they just went, right, well, you can play this, and this, because he plays Ray, who is the hero's love interest, Nancy's ex-boyfriend, who is, as you say, a dick. He plays the brain surgeon, which is a figment of Ted Raimi's Hank's imagination, And then he also, he provides a bit of a voiceover thing for Mikhail Gorbachev on the cover of a magazine as well, which, it's a bit of fun. But the way the whole film is set up, the first time I saw Our Lunatics, I wasn't a big fan of it. I really didn't like it. It wasn't what I expected when I went into it, and I don't think anyone can argue that it is what they expected, because it's not quite a horror film, but there are a few elements that seep through. There's a bit of blood, there's a bit of terror here and there, and it just feels a wee bit uneven that way. It's not quite a comedy, because whilst the comedy is somewhat totally based in the mental health department, it feels a bit mean laughing at it, because mental health is such a serious problem now. At the time, it wasn't considered to be as serious as it is now, so it was something that they could kind of make fun of, and having tinfoil everywhere is very stereotypical of mental health problems. So
yeah.
It's a bit mean-spirited that way, but I guess forgiveness for its time has to be applied. Josh Becker takes a lot of time to develop it, and he plays it quite slowly. There's slow down moments where there's a lot of dialogue between the two lead characters, and it's interrupted by some pretty terrific special effects for the budget. Now, some of the more ambitious special effects, where they use rear screen projection and things like that, don't maybe work quite as well nowadays, and they stick out like a sore thumb. But a lot of what they do, especially the stop motion animation and things like that, looks great.
Yeah, it was very well done.
Love it when they come to practical effects like that. And Deborah Foreman is particularly good in the lead. And I actually decided to look in, because I haven't seen her in many things recently. And she does have a fairly constant body of work, but it seemed to peter off in the middle of the 90s. Actually, just after this film, she only made a couple more films, because I remember her from Real Genius, and obviously she was in Sundown. And there's a few other films that she popped up in that, well, I know Grizzly 2's getting a release on Blu-ray imminently. I think it's played recently at a theatre with Charlie Sheen and George Clooney. And she was in Waxwork as well. But she dated the director, Anthony Hickox. And I think that's how she managed to become chums with the Bruce Campbell, Sam Raimi, Josh Becker, Ted Raimi force that was trying to make it in Hollywood at the time. So it's one of those things that she is one of the best parts of this film. It's got two strong leads. Bruce is amusing in his role, so any fan of Bruce is going to enjoy going back and visiting this.
He's just having fun.
Yeah.
He's just having fun in this film.
And as a result, he's kind of perfectly cast in those two roles, because that's the kind of crazy role that he would be born to play, as we see across his career. I can't imagine why it's going to get onto anyone's radar who isn't involved in either Bruce, Ted, or a fan of Josh Becker. Recommending this to someone, the second time I watched this film was with a girl who I'd brought home from the pub, and we were going to watch a movie, and she thought this sounded pretty good and put it on, and I wasn't too interested in the film. I was more interested in her, and just let it play in the background, and as a result, she became disinterested in the film quite quickly and became more interested in me, and it was a great night. It's good to know.
So just plug yourself there, mate. Nice, I like it.
Well, yes, it's a sign of the quality of the film. Not a lot of people would actually sit down and watch this if they saw it. It probably did quite well on late night cable for folks who are suffering from maybe insomnia or had a wee drink like I was doing. But for someone to pick it up on the video shelf and go, oh, this looks fantastic, it's probably be a bit deflating whenever you actually put it on. Would you have picked this out had you been looking for something to watch?
Possibly not, no, which is why I'm enjoying doing this, because it's opening me up to a whole new genre of film that I haven't really looked into beforehand. Yeah, as I say, there are good parts I definitely like about it, but again, because it's not something I would usually watch.
It's a difficult film to discuss because it has its fans, and I think those fans are fully embedded into the history of the film and the talent that's involved.
Yes.
I don't think it has any fresh fans who aren't interested in Bruce and Ted.
Yeah, it's definitely one of their films. Yeah. You can tell it's from their crew. It's like you say, it's a very odd film. I was watching it, wondering, because I have no knowledge really when it comes to mental health issues. of how much research they actually did and how accurately it is a depiction of it. Because, like I said, I think Ted nails the loneliness and isolation very well, and the struggles of agoraphobia. But the other issues in there, as much as I enjoy seeing Bruce suddenly randomly appear with this giant syringe, and Ted, in one moment, he's got him there to act against. The next thing, he's literally having to stand there pretending like someone's grabbing him, or like he thinks someone's grabbing him by the throat. I wonder how accurate that actually is. Like you say, is it a bit mean laughing at it and from that point of view? But the way they depict it and Bruce's performance, it is funny. And in his other performance, like you see him later on in the film arguing with the girl he's with as he gets out of the car, and of course she whizzes off and he looks like a dick in the middle of the street, almost falling on his ass because he was leaning on the car. And then that piece of baseball bat just comes out of nowhere. And I knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
But it was hilarious, and seeing him just go doom and hit the floor was brilliant.
Well, there was two things that got me on this watch. The first one was early on in the film. There's a sequence where we see spiders on the brain.
Yes.
I think that's probably one of the most effective and memorable moments from the film, because it's genuinely terrifying, and I think, as you say, it illustrates mental health pretty well. Having that kind of thought in your head would mess anyone up if you can't get rid of it. Yeah, that's an awful vision to have, and I think Josh Becker nails it with the way that he has illustrated it, because he uses stop-motion animation and isn't afraid to show some gore. But whenever I first watched this, I watched it because I was trying to watch everything Bruce Campbell. Mm-hmm. And he plays Ray at the start of the film, and then he comes back as the surgeon. And because it's the same actor, you're thinking, oh, is this some kind of elaborate hoax? Is Ray trying to manipulate Hank in some way to get money out of him? Because obviously Hank doesn't work, maybe has money, is able to rent an apartment in LA and order food without actually going out to work, so he must have some money. And I was putting more thought into trying to predict what was going to happen later on. And it makes it a wee bit more confusing because Bruce plays both roles, and there's something there that shouldn't be there. And had they brought in another actor, then that would have lessened that curiosity. I don't know whether or not I would have preferred Bruce just to play Ray and not the surgeon, or the other way around. Obviously, both roles would have not been quite as good without Bruce.
It was enjoyable, certainly.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. It's an odd one to pick out. It hasn't had a gorgeous Blu-ray put together. I don't know of any plans to. I know it was released on Laserdisc and DVD. I have it on VHS, which I'm chuffed about, I guess, because it's just one of the collection that I've got. And it was ordered in from the States, because I don't know if this has ever actually been fully released in the UK. It says it was released on the IMDb in May 92 of the UK, but I can't find any video listings for it and things, so I'm wondering if maybe it played a film festival and that was it. It wasn't picked up for distribution in the UK, because I know that costs a decent amount of money to do. I will give a bit of credit over to Joe Loduca, who did the music, and there's a song that's in here as well, about a mental breakdown, which is actually kind of fun. It's of its time, absolutely, and it's a little rap number, an early 90s rap number, and it actually was kind of fun to see the people performing the rap actually interacting with Ted, and it felt like they were putting together possibly a music video. And if the film was to be a big hit, then they would release the music video as well, and it would become one of those things, where the actor appears in the music video and it's got scenes from the actual film. So it would have been a nice thing had that happened, but who knows, if they do put together a nice Blu-ray or DVD, then we'll see something along that. Josh Becker he's very good at putting together written pieces about his films, and I know that he has documented in big detail about what actually happened during this film and how he put it together and how he made it. I couldn't actually track it down. I don't think Josh Becker's website is working currently, but he is very open about his films, and it does give you a good insight into them, and it's worth tracking that down if you are interested in the film at all. Also in 1991, and it's open for debate. We talked about it prior to the show being put together.
Of course, I'd prefer to bury the dead, but the ground isn't safe. The crawlers, they find the meat. My father's over there. They got my mother. They took her under.
Mind Warp was a film that Bruce appeared in. He was one of the lead roles. It was a film made by Fangoria. It was technically released in 1992, but we're going to put it into 1991 because there is a listing on IMDb for the Black Sunday Film Festival, and apparently it was played at that in September of 1991. So, because it's a quieter year, we'll just keep it as that. People may be upset about that.
If you don't cover up, you'll die.
Mind Warp is one of my favourite films. I love it. It's such a fun film. This was your first go around. What did you think of Mind Warp?
Well, the first thing I thought was I got serious Matrix vibes off of this.
Okay.
I actually did wonder if this was some sort of source of inspiration, because I mean, people living in a VF, in a holographic projection. Yes, granted, it wasn't like on quite the scale. It was more sort of like just living out your fantasies and living the life you want, like the interesting opera scene, which was the subject of some interesting dubbing there. Yeah, the first thing I got, especially with the way they plug in, because that's very similar, and then meeting the person running it in that rig. I get a call back to another Keanu Reeves movie that kind of looked like something out of Johnny Mnemonic.
Johnny Mnemonic, yeah, that's right.
And then, of course, obviously, she annoys the powers that be and gets herself booted out. She's one of those typical star hero leads who at first is actually quite whiny and annoying, but their whininess and annoying eventually gets them to a point where they become the better person. And obviously she gets ejected out into this world, which again is essentially, apart from the fact there's daylight, is essentially the real world in the Matrix. Obviously, this is where the differences come in, because obviously you've got the crawlers. I thought the production value on this was a really good one. Another very odd, creepy film. And the real world, actually, again, another movie reference to me, looked like something out of The Road Warrior, Mad Max 2.
Yeah.
Including Bruce. He looked like something out of The Road Warrior. I always love it in these post-apocalyptic movies when the hero comes in, can't see any of their face because they're all covered up, and they pull their face off. It's the same with Mel Gibson and Mad Max, and they're living on an awful diet of God knows what, but they're all chiseled and they look great underneath. It's that sort of post-apocalyptic chic. But no, it's again not a film I'd watch on my own, but it wasn't bad. Again, this is the thing I'm finding with all of these films is Bruce is always the really likable one. Whereas a lot of the characters take a while to sort of warm up to. I'm trying to think of the other lead. I'm terrible with names.
Marta.
Yeah, and her character, she becomes likable because obviously she finds the backbone. Yeah, Judy. She eventually sort of figures it out, but at first she's very much whiny, woe is me. And then obviously you start to like her because you see she sort of takes hold of the situation she's in and does something about it. Mm-hmm. And in the end, she actually goes out of her way to try and save, obviously, Bruce. But whereas Bruce, as soon as he comes into it, you like him, and he's just that likable guy. And I actually end up feeling very sorry for him. Definitely, if this had been made a few years later, I wonder if we'd have had The Matrix in the way we did.
True, yeah. It does have the Matrix vibe to it, and it was the idea of it was probably, I wouldn't like to say an inspiration for the Matrix, but you can see the comparison there. For me, when I first watched this, I got the VHS of it as Mind Warp out of a secondhand video library, and I took it home, and I wasn't expecting very much from it because it was one of those ones that it was quite difficult to find at the time in text. This was prior to the internet being about, so you couldn't go and just see a big list of movies. You had to go into bookshops and things like that and have a look at those film guides and see, what other films has this person been in, and you see the odd reference here and there, and some some books would have particular films, other books wouldn't. So finding this one is quite obscure. And I managed to find a copy of it I actually remember where. There's a town called Newtownards in Northern Ireland. There was a second-hand video library up above a news agency, and they had all these videos lying out on the floor. And I went in and I must have spent a fortune one day, because I think I bought about 24 videos and took them home. And it was, it was a gold rush for me. I remember some of the other films as well. Dudes with John Cryer as well. That was quite an achievement. But this one, Mind Warp, sitting down and watching it, it delivered everything that I was looking for. Having watched the Evil Dead series and Maniac Cop 1 and 2 and a couple of other sort of genre films, and being disappointed that Bruce wasn't in them very much. This one, he was in pretty much the entire movie, and that was somewhat rare. Outside of the well-known films that he was doing. So I absolutely lapped this up, because it was, I think this and Moontrap, there were two films that, yes, he's in the entire thing. He's the proper star of the film, so it was worth my time sitting down and watching it. As a result, I absolutely loved it. It also has Angus Scrimm, who is the tall man from the Phantasm series. So it's a combination of those two cult classic horror franchises, and I can't remember actually if Bruce and Angus do share. That's right, because yes, Angus is he's down drinking blood from the skulls of man and things like that. Yeah,
among other things he wants to do down there.
Yes, that's true. The film has enough of a mystery and a decent enough twist at the end to make it fresh and original. And it's not just your standard post-apocalyptic zombie horror film, which is important to say. It was originally financed and put together by Fangoria magazine. This was their first foray into movies, and I think they had 3 films. This was the first of the 3 before they closed it down for a while, and then I think they're back up and running again. But this was Fangoria's first film. I don't know that it did terribly well. I don't think it did. It got a limited release. According to IMDb, it was budgeted at $1 million. But I'd say the biggest success out of this was that Bruce himself met his wife on this film, who was one of I think she was a costume designer and makeup artist. So Bruce managed to get the ultimate treasure out of this one film. So this is probably one of the biggest films to him, and it's one of the biggest films for us to go out and track down, because he's in the whole thing. It's a cult classic. It delivers on every level. It's got gore, it's got sci-fi, it's got plot twists, it's got a pretty good script as well. Bruce gives an excellent performance, as does Judy, whose name is Marta Martin, and of course Angus Scrimm. I don't think that man has ever been bad in any film that he's made. He's a fantastic presence in a film. I do love Mind Warp. It's excellent. So would you recommend Mind Warp to people if you saw it playing at a party or something? Would you say, hey everybody, let's watch this?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what people's reaction to it was. The other thing I wanted to say about it, which I found interesting, was they always talk about Back to the Future Part 2, because obviously we've hit the date in which they travel into the future, and they look at, what did they get right? And they talk about video conferencing and big flat screen TVs and 3D imagery, all that sort of thing. And this film actually got something right too. Robot Hoovers.
Oh yeah, that's right. She throws the cup of green goo at the wall. And the robot Hoover comes and tries to pick it up. It's been released on Blu-ray. I have it, and I watched it recently on Blu-ray. But whenever it was released a couple of years ago on DVD, it came out under the title Brain Slasher. And I can't for the life of me work that out why. I did buy it on DVD as Brain Slasher just for the historic nonsense that was there. I have it on, I think, DVD as Mind Warp as well, and VHS. Obviously, I've got far too many copies of this film. It's unbelievable. But the Blu-ray is worth tracking down if you can get a copy. I think it was a limited run, but it does pop up on eBay every now and again. So if you are a fan of the film, do go and grab it, because the picture quality is pretty good on Blu-ray for what the film is. It's never going to be beautiful, and I can't imagine it's going to get a nice 4K Ultra HD restore done. There was one other person I'd written down, Elizabeth Kent. I wanted to mention her, but I've only just written her name down. She didn't go on to too much. She was in the movie Trapped Alive, which was one of those classic horror films that's just been released on Blu-ray by Arrow, but she stopped after this, and I was meaning to look in to see what else she made, because she was particularly good in this. She plays the older lady, Coralina. Or not older lady, she's fairly young in this film, but she's older than the protagonist, Judy.
She's the old toy,
Yes.
very much. Going back to the title, though, I can't understand why you'd release it under Brain Slasher, because Mind Warp, regardless of what you think of this film, whether you love it or hate it, Mind Warp is a perfect title. It perfectly describes what this film is about, because it is, once you take into account the whole plot and all the twists and turns it takes, and there are a couple, it makes perfect sense. It's exactly what it is. It literally is, for lack of a better term, it's fucking with you. It is fucking with your mind, and it is a mind warp, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's a perfect title. So why would you call it Brain Slasher? Because that implies something entirely different.
And even if you have a look at the art on the front of the DVD release, it shows some kind of zombie creature, which obviously does happen in the film, but with a big brain and wires coming out of it, nibbling on someone's arm. I guess maybe they commissioned the art, and then the person decided what it was going to be called based on that art, because they didn't like the name Mind Warp. The imagery does capture the film, I think, but it doesn't capture the word, or the words Mind Warp. So
Yeah.
I'm only surmising that someone somewhere just made that decision.
Some executive somewhere made a decision that was silly.
Yes, without ever seeing the film, because executives don't have to watch movies to know exactly what people want when it comes to movies.
Exactly.
Yes. All right, well, that's about it for 1991, those two films. We're going to be coming back to you next week with 1992, which has a bunch of pretty cool things going on. Bruce unleashes the Sandstorm. He travels back in time. He pays some homage. And he has his first brush with the king. So tune in next week for a year in the career, 1992 in Bruce's career. If you want to get in touch with us, you can. You can email us at gareth@ayearinthecareer.com and simon@ayearinthecareer.com. You can find me at garethmiles.com and on Twitter at garethmiles. And what about you, Simon? Where can people find you?
You can find my site at moviemustache.com. We've recently been branching out into video games a bit in my limited knowledge of. And you can also find me at movie_mustache on Twitter.
Excellent. All right. Well, other than that, we'll talk to you next week. Take care now.
See you next time.
What's wrong, Judy?